Thank you for being with us. This is another episode of the Outliers by Friesen Capital. And today we're super excited because we have Roberto Alvarez joining us. Roberto, I'm a big fan of the things that you've been doing for quite some time in the innovation technology space. And I love for you to do a brief intro of who you are for those guys that maybe are hiding under a rock and haven't heard about you.
You're very kind, Peter. It's great to be here with you as usual. So I normally say that I'm fully an engineer. I was trained as an engineer. I worked as a researcher. I worked as a business consultant, mostly in manufacturing and logistics. I developed and implemented MBA programs in Brazilian universities in the past. I worked for the Brazilian government, a quasi-government agency that was the Industrial Development Agency of Brazil. I was the head of international and innovation there for some time. And I had a chance to build a variety of partnerships with counterparts in various countries, the US, Germany, Sweden, so on and so forth. I'm executive director of a global network of universities, government agencies, mostly science, technology, innovation agencies, corporations, and private sector entities. In addition to that, I've been involved with early stage investment for quite some time. I was one of the first investors in the first startup portal in Brazil. Since then, I've been doing pre-seed investment and seed investment, angel investment in my personal capacity, and I've been involved with a variety of vehicles recently. I'm the founder and CEO of an early stage company in Brazil that does early stage investment of ventures. I have also helped to put together an industry 4.0 investment pool down in Brazil in partnership with Bossa Nova. And finally, in talking space, I'm a venture partner with Celder Capital. It's a New York City-based VC company. We invest in space tech. We were founded in 2020, and since then, we have invested in 10 startups. So I've been seeing innovation through the lenses of consulting, venturing, government, as an investor, especially in the last 10 years, and from this global perspective, from the perspective of the network that I've been driving in recent years.
So as you can see, folks, we're blessed and honored to have Roberto with us, one of the trailblazers of the innovation ecosystem space globally. And I would like actually to start talking about that. Today, we want to talk to you about ROKI, Return of Knowledge Investment. As you know, in Friesen Capital, we focus a bit more on innovation in emerging economies, but ROKI is a term that basically applies everywhere in the world. And we would like for you to give us like a brief intro of innovation ecosystems. What does it mean? What do they imply? Why are they so complicated to create and to maintain? Give me an idea of what does the term innovation ecosystem means.
We have seen a huge wave of digital innovation in Latin America, but we are not seeing yet that same type of thing when the subject comes to biosciences, advanced materials, robotics, AI. Why does it happen? People are seeing the elements, but they don't know how to cook that, right? So they know, oh, we need universities, we need investment, we need maybe new legal frameworks, we need companies, but how in practice can we combine all those elements to create economic results, to create impact? That's the issue. So innovation ecosystems are complex networks of different stakeholders. The relationships in those ecosystems, they're not happening in the vacuum. They're happening in the context of institutions and economy. What do I mean? Those relationships, they're framed and constrained by legislation and how, for instance, can someone use public money to build private sector ventures. It also happens in the context of the economy when an investor makes a decision to allocate capital to an innovative venture. It's not because that thing is cool or nice. It has to be cool or nice, but in comparison to other opportunities that you have in the market. Innovation ecosystems are complex networks in which different types of players or stakeholders interact. Those interactions, they're framed by legal frameworks and they're framed by the conditions of the local economy.
I would only add that it kind of works like a living organism, doesn't it? You require a specific balance, and that's what they're called ecosystems. And if at some point in time things finally started working, but you don't pay attention to equilibrium, you run a high risk of just having the thing completely vanished or derailed. And I think that is probably why it is so hard and why so many people try, especially from emerging economies, to go to places where it's like a very active, vibrant ecosystem, very obvious innovation. And we try to replicate that, but it just doesn't happen.
There's an amazing book from a friend of mine, Greg Horowitz, The Innovation Rainforest. So when we think about ecosystem, we're not thinking about a plantation. We're thinking about a rainforest. If a university develops a new molecule, a new method, that's not innovation. It will not make money. It will only generate money when a company is taking that to the market. For anyone who wants to translate that knowledge, that invention, and want to take it to the market and make money, you will need to transaction, normally public and private sector.
I like what you're saying, and I really want to talk about like the public policy and the entrepreneurial state. But just before that, you just mentioned something that I think it's very, very important. And from what I see in emerging economies, it's very rare to find those guys that are jumping from one sector to the other, from one industry to the other. And that's how actually innovation happens, because a university has like a very focused, very proven business model of knowledge transfer and creating novelty and inventions. But there's a complete lack usually of innovation. On the other hand, usually corporates are really good at commercialization, marketing, and that sort of thing. But they lack the resources, they lack the culture, they even lack the financial patience to do long-term basic research in order to create the next big thing. How can we achieve that?
I've never been to a place where people said, hey, we're very happy about the industry-university relationship. They will always complain. People in the university space, in many cases, they don't understand what business needs. They speak different language. There's an empathy gap, but there are practical solutions to do that. There are many universities in the globe that have internship programs in industry. Universities in the US and other entities have their tech transfer offices. They watching what's being done in the university that could generate intellectual property and protecting that intellectual property. And they're commercializing that. They're working with companies. Almost 25 years later, a country called Brazil in Latin America passed a similar piece of legislation. Universities had to create their tech transfer offices. But here comes what happens in practice. Here comes another thing. Most of the Brazilian universities, let's say the best science or research universities in Brazil, are government-owned universities. They cannot go to the market, hire someone. What do they need to do? They need to go to the capital of Brazil, Brasilia. They need to lobby the federal administration. And in order to approve a new budget line to hire one person. To fill that position, you cannot simply go and hire someone. No, you need to hire an open and public selection process in the country. It was impossible for universities to hire the people that they needed to run their tech transfer offices. Legal frameworks were constraining that circulation of resources that's needed to jump from one tree to the other. This is like about the friction that we have in economies across the world that is not present in advanced economies, especially in the United States. And this is about legal frameworks. We need to lower the friction and have practical tools to allow for the circulation of resources between public and private sector.
One of the things that, as you know, we've been doing for a bit more than 15 years has been training both researchers and tech transfer specialists precisely for what you're saying. One of the big challenges is that it actually doesn't even matter how old you are or how much market experience you have. If you live in a country that does not do tech transfer, it's the chicken and the egg problem, right? One of the things that I really envy is that some universities even have the requirement to go through one of the cohorts before you can ask for a tenure in a university, which I think is brilliant because it makes the researcher understand the value of the market. And then because of that, all the research that you do and all the students that you're guiding in your lab are going to understand the need of innovation more than just the novelty or the invention, right? However, it has been a bit more complicated in other economies. The typical idea is that the researcher understands their job as something that they do in a lab, and then whatever they come up with, they just go dump it into the tech transfer office. They just get dumped this massive file. One of the things that we've been seeing across geographies is that there's a lot of knowledge being created that has a lot of invention, that has a lot of novelty, but then it just keeps on piling dust. The possibility of having that thing turned into a practical application of the technology and that into a product and that into a company statistically is just ridiculous. How can we change that?
To go around, to engage, it's a complex endeavor. So you need connectors. This will not happen by chance. You need to have an office that has budget to go around and do hustling, interact with people. You need an organizational solution to make that happen. They need to build teams, to train people, to do hustling, to do business development. They need to allocate a budget to do that. They need to start to measure performance of their IP portfolio. At the same time, if you develop something that your economy doesn't need, you're not generating the money, right? So you will need to connect globally to look for opportunities to monetize. And you need to understand the fitting, right? Where can that solution fit in your local national economy and globally? And at the same time, corporations that want to engage with universities, they will need to invest. They will need to build their teams, their corporate venture capital, their open innovation teams. But people sometimes say, hey, it's a cultural issue. It is not. We can craft culture.
I'm a big fan of Mariana Mazzucato, the author, the strategist that you know very well. She talks about the entrepreneurial state, and she talks about this different vision and the way that it basically permeates through the culture. And for me, that is one of the big problems that we have. One of the things that I've come across many times, especially in Latin America, is that people are super ingenious. I think we're super resourceful, especially because we know how to manage adversity. The term innovation imposes a big word that some people are afraid of. And we automatically think that we're not innovative. But anyway, she talks about this mentality that is generalized at every level, at every silo, in every organization. How can we achieve that?
I think there are different layers for this conversation, Pedro. One is about innovation itself and what innovation means. And let's imagine a matrix here, right? One dimension is innovation for whom? Am I innovating for the global market or my neighborhood? People think that just creating something new, that is always relative. It's relative to what? To the markets that you are addressing. We see a lot of digital innovation in Latin America that it's changing, right? And that's good. But we have lots of copycats. We had proven business models from abroad being created in different parts of Latin America. That's innovation, but not for the global market. That's innovation for that national market, maybe. We just need to understand that when we talk about innovation, we need to think about a market. What is the market that you are addressing? If we think about, we have capital intensive, when we have capital light innovation in some way, we have innovations that are more connected to science and the need of research, and others that are really more about organizational capacity and scale. For instance, banking. One of the largest banks in Brazil today, it's called Nubank. They're not coming from research. It's a business model innovation powered by digital technologies. So we need to think along those dimensions, right? The third point about Mariana Mazzucato's idea, just some figures here. The Brazilian National Science and Technology Fund was multiplied by 2.5 or 3 times in relation to the past year. So,
wow.
And the government is trying to address some of, and to adopt some of the ideas that Mariana Mazzucato has been professing. I see a big risk, because when folks in traditional government setups think about having the same government model that they had 10, 20, 30 years ago to do what she said, it will fail, because you need new government setups that are public-private partnerships that are in between government and industry. If we think that people with traditional government mindsets can manage that, you're wrong. You need people in government with industry experience, with venturing experience. It's not just paper processing and law and politics and policy. It's understanding business. It's understanding the technology. It's putting those things together. But I see a big risk in environments where people are not understanding what is behind that. They're not understanding the assumptions. If you take the federal R&D expenditure in the United States, 80% is to solve problems. Let's move down to Latin America and Brazil. We know the amount of money is much smaller, right? 20% of that money is to solve problems. So it's the opposite. So when Mariana says completely makes sense, hey, you need to align your scarce resources. So let's focus on missions. Let's solve problems. But that will only work with the new legal frameworks, with people in government who have real business and research experience, with the monkeys jumping from tree to tree, with new government setups, and it will not work with state-owned companies, state-owned enterprises. So the big risk is we cannot replicate the thinking of the 1950s, 60s, and 70s.
Going a bit more into depth, one of the big challenges that I see is that people sometimes read a few things about success stories like the Apollo mission documented by Mariana, and they go crazy about it, and they want to start throwing money at the problem, and it doesn't work. People that are having the exact same mindset, that have been managing stuff with a scarcity mindset, and then they throw a lot of money into that and they don't know how to manage abundance, then that is a big problem. On the contrary, there are places, you mentioned the US. In the US, since about 2010, we were able to create a very interesting platform that is mounted on the National Science Foundation with the I-Core incubation program that we usually enrich and based on EVELI, on evidence-based entrepreneurship and lean innovation. And then once you finish that program, that you have been trained by the best instructors in the country, and that you got $50,000 just to do customer discovery, then you can apply to the Small Business Administration and you can get money for the SBIR program or the STTR, where you're also trained for another second year by the best of the best. And then you get $250,000 to continue customer discovery and then do the prototype. And then after that, you can apply for SBIR2 or STTR2 with $750,000 and another year of training and support. So basically, after 3 years, you submitted your TRL4 project that was funded by the National Science Foundation. So all the money from your university and the National Innovation Agency goes into creating a prototype that actually works. And then after that, you get $1,050,000 US, and you get the support of 2 national agencies and the best instructors in the country, right? So it's a platform and everyone knows it. So when you go to study your research master's degree or PhD, you already know the pathway to launch your spinoff. So what do you say to those guys that are doing policy, that read the book and are trying to do something? I still, unfortunately, on 2023, I hear a lot this term that they say in Spanish, conflict of interest, which basically means that if you are a researcher from a public university or a public research institution and you create something, you cannot commercialize it. You cannot become an entrepreneur. You have to stay as a researcher and you cannot profit into that. What do you say to those policymakers?
My comment would be update your mindset, update your toolkit, and update your institutions. You have a whole ecosystem of tools. Part of what is expected from anyone in the US is to learn how to use that toolkit. You gotta run. You got to understand who the players are, where you can get money, what do you need. This mindset also is needed. Things will not happen just by chance. The whole set of tools and instruments, it's much more advanced. That whole concept that there are conflicts, that's BS. Mingling public and private sector, it's more than good, it's necessary. Last week, the National Science Foundation in the United States released the 16 finalists for its regional innovation ecosystem program. And from that list, they will pick the finalists. Each one will get $100 million US to develop local regional innovation ecosystems. They got 188 proposals in the beginning. They now have, like, let's say 16 finalists. They will pick 6. So it's a funnel. It's the same process that we as investors have with the startups in which we invest. And in addition to those, they have funded, they gave 1 million to 44 different projects that in some way applied, but were not really mature. Let me give you another example that's amazing. The United States has created Space Force. I told you, I've been investing in, through Solar Capital, we've been investing in space tech. We invested on a company that will build data centers on the moon. That's correct. You heard that. We invested in a company that's doing indoor agriculture for space. It's a company called Interstellar. They won NASA's Deep Space Food Challenge. We've been investing, and I've been investing in space tech through Solar Capital with my colleagues. And we were talking with an incredibly seasoned investor, and he was mentioning the Space Force because one of the companies in which he has invested just ran for a bid that the US government had. On a Saturday, Space Force put a bid on their new marketplace. Proposals were due by Sunday. They got a confirmation on Monday. The money was paid on Tuesday. Can you imagine a government in Latin America operating at that speed? That is what is needed.
You know, how it all got started is basically about 10 years ago, the pilot of ICOR, this guy in the National Science Foundation with a brilliant investment mentality, Errol Arkelic, they realized that all that money was going into doing basic research, but then there was no funnel, there was no next step, and we didn't know what was going to happen there. He went to Steve Blank, and they basically ran this pilot in Stanford with 11 projects that ended up becoming this massive thing. By today, they've trained literally thousands of people. There are more than 1,200 universities, colleges, institutions, and organizations in that ecosystem. I mean, that's huge. And because of that, even though it's an early stage program, they've raised $760 million in funding for the projects. And I think that is one of the reasons why these guys are so good, why the program actually works, and why it has become such a powerful ecosystem. You have transparency, you know the different steps that you have to take, and they also understand that getting money into the innovation space, into the novelty, the invention space is important, because that is actually what is going to enable you to continue doing that research. Roberto, I would finally just ask you for final comments to people that are watching. As you know, the viewers of this space usually come from academy, are entrepreneurs, or are investors within the deep tech space. So what would be your final comments to them?
The future is ours. The only big constraint that we have, I think, really is about our mindsets. I've been investing. I see big opportunities in Latin America. Entrepreneurship gained a lot of momentum. When I finished my engineering degree, I never thought about being an entrepreneur. I had never heard about a startup. We have a mindset shift in the region. I've been investing in science-related ventures in Latin America. A few weeks ago, I just made an investment in the first company in the world to be able to repair, reuse, and recycle lithium batteries. And it's based out of Brazil. Those folks are connected globally. They developed the initial process to recycle batteries in partnership with a research university. Last week, they had the first shipment of cobalt oxide coming from the batteries. That's a company that has a global mindset, that has people coming with research background, working together with an amazing serial entrepreneur. So mingling those things, it's amazing. I've invested in a company that today is the third largest in terms of manufacturing capacity in Brazil for motorcycles, but they do only electrical motorcycles. At their headquarters, they have like 70, 80 people, and 50 of them have studied abroad. Here's another, again, the global connection. I see that happening in Mexico. We reviewed a bunch of super exciting startups. I see that happening in Chile for Notco to other companies. I see that happening in Argentina. We mentioned Logic, but also there are folks there that have created a new venture builder accelerator fund focused on science-based companies. So this can gain momentum. And there's a big opportunity to unleash value creation, because what's missing, it's not the ingenuity. And more, it's not the technical skills or capabilities. It's about the business structures. So if we can bring that and connect those companies with the global north, where maybe some of the solutions that they're creating are not finding the markets locally, we can take the north, help them to scale. That could be a bank. So, and just to finish, I was in São Paulo. There's a program in Brazil that's called Innovativa. Brazil has 27 states. They had startups from all 27 states pitching and presenting roughly a month ago. And I was one of the judges there, right? I was amazed by the number of startups that were co-founded by people with PhD degrees, young people. So I see this gaining momentum. There are many missing links, but also there are many opportunities to unleash value creation through platforms like Freestone Capital. So I really want to end this with a positive note. I see momentum building. I see big opportunities to unleash value creation, connecting Latin America with innovative hubs around the globe. And the key to do that is to shift mindsets. Yes, we can. I think I've seen a lot of brilliant people, technically brilliant, but that we're not thinking about the global market. We must do it. Thanks for the opportunity, Pedro.
No, I appreciate your time. I appreciate your comments. And for all folks following us, we are in social media networks like LinkedIn, Facebook. You can find us in Spotify. Thank you for watching. Until the next time.